When one hears the word alone, the mind often rushes to images of isolation, abandonment, or emotional void. But this reaction does not arise from the state of aloneness itself. It is the result of conditioning. From childhood, we are taught to seek validation through connection, to measure value by the presence of others. Yet, it is in the absence of noise that one begins to hear what has always been present but unnoticed. To live alone is not to be without people, it is to return to oneself. When there is no one to impress, no one to entertain, and no one to compare to, a profound sense of clarity begins to surface. You are no longer a reflection of others' opinions, you become your own witness. And that witness is neutral, aware, and quietly powerful. Aloneness is not a wall between you and the world, it is the open space in which the world becomes less urgent. Union in the external world often comes at the cost of internal separation. To belong somewhere, many sacrifice parts of themselves, compromising intuition, silencing thoughts, adjusting behavior to fit in. But in solitude, nothing needs to be shaped. The whole being can breathe. There is no need to hide discomfort, no pressure to appear whole, no performance to maintain. This is not loneliness. It is the gentle realization that one has always been complete. In this sacred space, you begin to touch the roots of your own presence. You realize that the one who observes, the one who questions, and the one who seeks peace have always lived inside you. Living alone provides the stillness to recognize this triad as one. You are no longer pulled in 1,000 directions. The storm that was once inside begins to dissolve, not because the winds have stopped, but because you no longer fear being shaken. Most people seek relationships to escape the fear of themselves. The silence of solitude can be frightening when you have spent years distracting yourself with movement and voices. But fear only exists where understanding is absent. When one sits deeply with oneself, not to judge but to simply observe, the sharpness of aloneness softens. It becomes not a blade but a mirror, one that reflects truth without distortion. Aloneness teaches you the art of sufficiency, not the sufficiency of arrogance, but the sufficiency of grounded being. You no longer crave someone to complete you, for you have found the missing piece was never missing. It was simply buried under layers of noise. You begin to walk lighter, speak with intention, and hold space for yourself in ways no one else ever could. When you are alone, and truly alone, the subtle pulse of life becomes more apparent. The rustle of wind, the flicker of a candle, the sound of your breath, all of it becomes alive. You become more sensitive, not weaker. More open, not more vulnerable. The senses sharpen, the thoughts settle, and the heart becomes a steady drum, no longer rushing to match someone else's tempo. This is why aloneness is not absence. It is union. It is the point where mind, body, and spirit sit at the same table and finally begin to converse. There is no guest to entertain, no image to maintain. Just you, whole without need, in quiet companionship with your own essence. In a world that constantly speaks, silence becomes a rare and valuable presence. It is not empty, nor is it passive. Silence is a space where the loudness of the world dissolves, and what remains is truth without decoration. Most people fear silence because they are unaccustomed to its depth. Yet it is in this depth that wisdom sleeps, waiting to be awakened not by noise, but by still awareness. Silence does not argue, yet it reveals. It does not instruct in words, but it corrects in feeling. When one enters true silence, all borrowed beliefs begin to surface. You hear the echoes of thoughts you've never questioned. You recognize patterns you mistook for personality. And in this mirror, you begin to discern between what was given to you and what was born within you. In the quiet, the mind no longer runs away. It is forced to sit and face itself, and in that confrontation, real learning begins. There are no distractions to escape to, no excuses to hide behind. The teacher appears not as a voice from outside, but as a calm presence within. Silence exposes your insecurities, not to shame you, but to show you where you are still divided. Through silence, you understand the weight of words. You begin to speak less but with more precision. You realize that most speech is not communication but noise, attempts to fill space, avoid discomfort, or gain approval. Silence trains the tongue to become disciplined. It teaches that not every truth must be spoken and not every thought deserves a voice. In the quiet, time changes its pace. Without constant stimulation, you no longer live in reaction. The mind, once crowded with clutter, becomes spacious. You start to notice details that were once invisible. The sound of leaves, the rhythm of your breath, the subtle shift in your emotional current. Silence sharpens perception by removing the dullness of constant input. Silence also teaches patience. Growth is not rushed here. Lessons unfold in layers, often without announcement. You learn to wait, not passively, but attentively. You learn that not every answer arrives immediately, and some questions exist simply to deepen your presence. This is not a failure of understanding, but a maturity of awareness. In silence, the inner voice grows stronger. It is not the voice of fear or doubt, but of clarity. You begin to trust it, not because it is loud, but because it is consistent. It does not promise comfort, but it points toward integrity. This voice becomes your compass, guiding you through choices not with force, but with quiet certainty. Silence becomes a temple, an invisible space where the mind bows, the ego softens, and the heart speaks. In this space, you do not become less active, you become more intentional. You do not retreat from life, you engage with it more truthfully. And in this engagement, the greatest lessons unfold not from what you say, but from what you no longer need to say. From the moment we step into the world, roles are assigned to us. Son, daughter, student, friend, partner. Each role comes with expectations, with unspoken scripts that shape our behavior. We begin to perform, not out of deceit, but from a deep desire to belong. Slowly, the performance becomes our identity, and we forget that there was ever a self before the role began to speak louder than our essence. Living alone removes the stage. When there is no audience, the need to perform begins to dissolve. The identity built around how others perceive us loses its grip. Without someone to please or someone to impress, the question arises, who am I when no one is looking? It is a question many avoid, yet it holds the doorway to liberation. In solitude, the mask is not torn away. It simply becomes unnecessary. Freedom from roles does not mean rejecting others. It means returning to a center that is not shaped by others' needs. A partner may see you as strong, so you play strong even when weak. A friend may see you as wise, so you hide your confusion. These are cages made of praise. In solitude, you are allowed to be contradictory, evolving, uncertain. The rigidity of roles gives way to the fluidity of truth. There is a great relief in not having to explain yourself, in not needing to be consistent for someone else's comfort. You begin to explore parts of yourself that were silenced by expectation. The artist, the wanderer, the philosopher, the quiet child, all begin to speak once more. These voices are not new. They were only waiting for the noise to fade. They were buried under the weight of who you thought you had to be. Roles are not wrong. They serve a function in society. But when they begin to define the inner world, the self is lost. You begin to confuse repetition with authenticity. To live without roles, even temporarily, is to taste who you are beneath the rehearsals. It is not a permanent withdrawal from connection, but a necessary retreat into wholeness. The self that emerges in solitude is not always pleasant. Sometimes it is impatient, bitter, or afraid, but it is real, and it is only through facing this unfiltered version that growth can begin. In solitude, you confront not only your potential, but your resistance to it. You meet the self that doesn't seek applause, that doesn't need to be understood, only seen clearly. This inner clarity brings an unexpected strength. When you return to the world, you no longer seek validation through roles. You no longer fear rejection because you have accepted the part of you that exists outside of roles. Conversations become more honest, relationships more grounded. You are no longer acting, you are present. And in that presence, others sense something unshakable. The path of freedom is not paved by isolation, but by authenticity. To be free from roles is to realize that who you are is not a fixed image, but a living truth that needs no label. It is the silence after the performance, the breath after the applause fades, the self that remains when all roles have been set down. There is a voice that never leaves you, no matter where you go. It walks beside you when others disappear. It speaks when the world is silent. This voice is your internal dialogue, the stream of thoughts, judgments, hopes, and fears that flows within every waking moment. For most, it is unconscious and chaotic. But for one who turns inward, this voice becomes the most revealing mirror and the most intimate companion. Many people chase relationships to avoid this voice. They surround themselves with conversation, music, and movement, hoping that the noise will drown out the discomfort inside. Yet the relationship we hold with ourselves defines every other connection. If the inner voice is harsh, we fear criticism. If the inner voice is restless, we cannot find peace in stillness. What we have not made peace with inside, we project onto the world outside. To live alone is to meet this voice with full attention. There is no distraction to hide behind, no person to blame. In the stillness of solitude, the internal dialogue grows louder, not because it has changed, but because now it is heard. It is in this confrontation that real transformation begins. You start to notice the patterns, the repetition of self-doubt, the echo of past wounds, the scripts you've unknowingly followed. This internal conversation becomes a training ground. You learn to observe it without judgment, to question its origins, to separate truth from habit. The voice that once controlled you becomes a subject of meditation, and slowly, what was once unconscious becomes conscious. You are no longer a prisoner to your thoughts. You become their guide, their witness, their sculptor. As this relationship deepens, compassion arises. You stop punishing yourself for old mistakes. You begin to speak to yourself as you would to a child, firm but kind. You no longer crave praise from others because the inner voice no longer tears you down. You learn to sit with your flaws, not to justify them, but to understand their roots. This is not indulgence, it is honesty. The depth of this internal dialogue begins to shape your outer world. You no longer speak carelessly because you know the power of words within. You listen more deeply because you have practiced listening to yourself. You begin to attract different relationships, not built on need, but on resonance. You do not look to others to complete a broken sentence within you. You come to others whole, and they respond in kind. This dialogue becomes the fire you return to when life grows cold. In success, it reminds you of humility. In failure, it reminds you of strength. It does not flatter or deceive. It speaks from the deepest part of your being, the part that seeks growth over comfort, clarity over confusion. This is the relationship that endures beyond time, distance, and change. To nurture this inner dialogue is to cultivate a sacred bond, not between you and an image of who you should be, but between you and the truth of who you are. This relationship cannot be abandoned, only ignored, and the moment you choose to turn toward it with courage and stillness, it begins to reveal a depth no external voice can match. Expectation is a subtle chain. It appears harmless, even nobled, dressed as hope, as ambition, as care, but beneath its surface lies control, the desire to shape reality into our preference, to make people behave according to our comfort, to bend time to our desire. It is not love that suffocates relationships. It is expectation. It is not life that exhausts the mind. It is the failure of things to match the story we wrote in advance. When one leaves alone, the theater of expectation begins to fall silent. There is no one to wait on, no one to disappoint, no one to prove anything to. In that stillness, you begin to see how tightly you once held the reins of control. You notice how often you shaped your mood around whether others met your unspoken demands. And without someone to blame or reward, you are left with the raw truth of your own attachments. Peace does not come from controlling life. It comes from releasing the grip. Expectations are weights the mind carries, heavy, invisible, constant. When you expect others to act a certain way, you are not seeing them as they are, but only as a projection of your comfort. And in that moment, you are not loving them, you are managing them. But when the expectation fades, space opens. You begin to relate to people and to yourself without condition. The absence of expectation does not mean passivity. It means clarity. You can still act, still speak, still give, but without the burden of needing a specific return. Your actions become expressions, not transactions. A kind word is given without needing praise. A task is completed without needing reward. In this space, the heart rests, the mind quiets, the body softens. You are no longer living against reality, but with it. Living alone is a training in surrender. Without someone else to fill in the silence, you meet your own demands head on. You see how many expectations you have even of yourself to be productive, to be joyful, to be free of pain. And slowly, you learn to let those go too, not by becoming careless, but by becoming present. You stop measuring each moment against an ideal and begin to experience it as it is. Peace enters not through achievement, but through acceptance. Not acceptance as resignation, but as recognition. You begin to trust that life unfolds with or without your interference. And the more you observe without judgment, the more you understand how deeply expectation clouds perception. You stop looking for perfection and start seeing beauty. You stop chasing happiness and start living in truth. In solitude, you no longer perform for approval. You no longer ask life to validate your worth through outcome. This detachment does not make you indifferent. It makes you alive. Each moment, unfiltered by expectation, becomes a teacher. Each setback, no longer seen as failure, becomes a lesson. You live lighter, with fewer regrets, because you are not dragging the weight of imagined futures. Where expectations die, presence is born, and in presence, peace is not something you create. It is something you return to. A peace that is not dependent on others' moods, not shaken by shifting circumstances, not lost in unfulfilled hopes. It is the peace of one who has ceased arguing with what is, and has begun to move with the quiet rhythm of what always has been. Solitude is often misunderstood. To many, it appears as withdrawal, as if one is turning away from the world out of bitterness or defeat. But true solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the cultivation of strength without dependency. It is not a retreat born of fear, but a return born of clarity. When one chooses to be alone, not out of rejection, but out of purpose, solitude becomes a forge where self-reliance is tempered. In the silence of being alone, you begin to recognize how much of your identity was constructed around interaction. You learn what remains when there is no applause, no agreement, no comforting voice to guide your next move. The world no longer tells you who to be. You must find that answer within. This does not make you cold, it makes you responsible. It teaches you to trust the inner compass that often went ignored in the noise of companionship. Solitude demands that you become your own caretaker. You learn to prepare your own food, to organize your time, to manage your energy. These are not small tasks. They are the rituals of self-respect. When there is no one to remind you, you must remember. When there is no one to motivate you, you must rise anyway. Through this repetition, discipline becomes natural, and the sense of needing others to hold your structure begins to fade. Self-reliance is not merely about survival, it is about alignment. When you are not relying on external validation, your actions come from a deeper place. You write, create, speak, move, not because someone is watching, but because something within needs expression. Solitude gives this need room to speak. It removes the filters of expectation and allows you to act from truth rather than performance. The solitude trained individual does not fear company, but they do not depend on it. They walk into relationships not to fill a void, but to share a fullness. They do not burden others with the task of making them whole. This is the quiet strength that solitude instills. It rewires the emotional system from seeking to offering, from demanding attention to radiating presence. Solitude reveals the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness cries for distraction. Aloneness leans into the silence. Loneliness resents the space around it. Aloneness breathes into that space. As the days pass, the fear of being by oneself transforms into a deep reverence for the self that is always present, the one that does not flee in discomfort, the one that does not collapse in uncertainty. This practice of self-reliance does not make you invulnerable, but it does make you rooted. When storms come, as they always do, you do not shatter at every wind. You may bend, you may tremble, but your ground is deeper. You have sat with your own mind long enough to know its games. You have listened to your own heart long enough to know its rhythm. You no longer abandon yourself when no one else is there. To live in solitude is to walk alongside your own shadow and not turn away. It is to build an inner foundation that holds not just in peace, but in chaos. It is to meet your own needs without shame, to trust your own steps without echo, and to know that you are not separate from life. You are simply aligned with its deeper current.